Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to this special lunchtime thinking sponsored by Teneo and part of our responsible leadership series. For the next hour, I'll be in conversation with Katherine Ainley, the new-ish Chief Executive of Ericsson UK. Katherine joined Ericsson from BT in February, in the middle of the third national lockdown. So it'll be fascinating to hear a bit about how she rallied her troops over Zoom calls, presumably flawlessly powered by her own 5G network. I remember when I was a media reporter at the Times 10 years and more ago now, and being basically a bit scared of all the veteran telecoms reporters because it is a world with a lot of acronyms and a lot of technical terms like wave spectrums and wireless network bands. And it all seemed a bit puzzling and I didn't really understand it. And I'm still not entirely sure I understand it, at least not everything. But what I do understand is that it is really important. As the world grows more interconnected and more mobile, the networks, the communication networks that underlie and enable that transformation, that revolution are becoming increasingly critical. So if you want to talk about long-term growth prospects or harnessing innovation or net zero or agricultural efficiency, then you can't not talk about telecoms. And specifically, you can't not talk about 5G. So it's great to have Katherine here, who's at the forefront of that whole debate. Just before we kick off, I should say that this is a think-in like any other think-in, not a panel discussion. So effectively, that means that we would love to hear from as many of you as possible. My colleague, Mark, is hosting the chat, so please type in any thoughts you have into the chat and I'll pick them up and bring you into the conversation, or you can raise your blue hand. I'm not sure if it's a blue or a yellow hand now on Zoom, but raise some sort of digital hand and I will bring you into the conversation. It really livens up the discussion if we hear from our members, so please don't be shy. Even if you're a 5G conspiracy theorist, we want to hear your point of view. So let's get started. Katherine, okay, so 5G, I've read about it. It just means the next wireless network technology. But I've read that it's going to be 6,000 times faster than 4G. But I've also read that in practice now it's like 3 to 4 times faster than 4G. And I remember that my life didn't really change much when we went from 3G to 4G. Is my life going to change much when I go from 4G to 5G?
Well, I'm going to say yes, aren't I? So thank you for having me here today. It's great to meet you all. I took this job because I'm so super excited about 5G and rolling out better mobile connectivity. So I joined from BT and had a really interesting time there doing lots of different things. But 5G is probably the most exciting thing that's kind of happened in telco for whatever, 10, 15, 20 years. The number I have is about 100 times faster than 4G. It depends, as always, these things do. But why is 5G so excited? It's because you've not only got that speed, but you've got what we call low latency. And what that actually means is you don't get a delay, basically, or you get such a small delay that you won't notice it. And that means that you can use it for so many more things. So not only is it loads faster, but you don't get a delay. And that then opens up lots of things like, what can you use? I mean, I can go on forever and I'm sure we'll cover it in more detail, but you can look at how you can use it in manufacturing or to potentially drive cars, or you can be in a joint virtual reality world. Because you don't have that delay and because of the speed, it'll feel like you're basically really there. So really, really exciting stuff. And I challenge you a little bit that your life didn't change when you went from 3G to 4G. I think, perhaps it didn't change overnight, but you think of all the apps that kind of came off the back of 4G around Uber and Airbnb and all the rest of it. A lot of that was driven, particularly things like Uber, where you can find where you are and see stuff live. It enabled a whole world of apps that we hadn't even thought of at the beginning. So sorry, I can keep going for ages.
I guess it was so transformative, so seamless in its transformation. I didn't really notice. But there is a at the moment a gap between what 5G is now which is not very much faster than 4G, and what 5G could become, and what is needed to get from where we are now to the place where you're describing, where it's 600 times faster?
Well, I think it is faster. I mean, I think there's a couple of things here. One, it is still being rolled out. When I'm on 5G, I really do notice it. So it is faster for me than it is than Wi-Fi for sure, and it is getting faster and faster. And one of the things that we found on one of our surveys is lots of people think they have 5G, but they don't actually have a 5G phone and things like that. So, making sure we've got everything set up, but then the environment around, so the apps that you've got and so on, over time, they will also become enabled for 5G. But the thing that's really exciting about 5G for me is not just the consumer bit, which is kind of where you go first, it's the business side as well. So we work with lots of businesses to do pilots and kind of work through how we can use it. And it's super exciting because of that speed and because of the fact that you're effectively there. So, I mean, I can dive into, and probably the easiest thing is to dive into an example if that's a good place.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I mean, actually, one of the best, there's a couple of good examples, but one of the best examples is actually the way we use it in Ericsson, which ties into some of the sustainability stuff as well. So if we're putting in a mobile mast in a remote area, what we can do now is send one person with a drone to map that site in a virtual reality world in 5G. And then everybody who needs to work on that can work on it from wherever they are and create a model, effectively an augmented reality model where we can work on it in a separate place where that drone is fed back the information on 5G, and we can work seamlessly there without having to travel, which has all the time issues of sending people to some remote location, but also the environmental impact of maybe 7 or 8 people driving off to go and look at a site.
But can you just, for people that don't know, and probably I include myself in this, what actual infrastructure does it take to set up a 5G network, and where are we now, and where do we need to be? Because my understanding is that for 5G, the types of wavelengths necessitate masts that are closer together than current networks. Is that right?
It depends. So, and actually, I thought your point on acronyms was really good. So I quite like this because I come from a non-technical background, so I'll try and translate it for you. Where we are in the UK is we've done what they call the spectrum auctions, which is where they auction off the sort of the bandwidth that they're going to use for 5G. So that's now all been allocated, and everyone knows what they've got. So all the operators then buy that and use it. What you then need is you need a mast. And then on the top of the mast, you have what they call antennae, which are the little white boxes. In fact, we launched a new one today, which I can talk about a bit later. But gets very exciting if you're into your technology geekiness. But they sit on top, and you'll have maybe 2, 3, or 4 of those antennae, and they send out the actual 5G signal, and then they're managed in what's called a core, which is, I describe it as the brains that sits behind the 5G. So basically, all of that needs upgrading for them to move to 5G.
Okay, and we'll talk in a bit, as I think when we're discussing how 5G can enable all sorts of issues. We'll talk then about some of the obstacles that you see are in place that have prevented perhaps faster 5G rollout. But I just want to bring in Andrew Girdwood if he's around, because he has made 2 very good points. One about remote surgery, which seems like one of the most exciting potential avenues that 5G could go down, but also about the tension between 5G and Wi-Fi.
I can't claim the first point. That was the other Andrew Butler. I can repeat my concerns. Yes, I think they are concerns that a lot of the telecoms companies have invested heavily in not just copper but fiber broadband. It got to the point where house prices were affected by whether you had a good broadband connection. If 5G lives up to its potentials, the need for cables into your house or indeed your business dramatically drops. And there must be tensions in telecoms providers as to whether they want 5G to threaten their fiber investment. And I really don't know how you handle that one. I don't think Ericsson's in that place, though, are you?
No. So we do the infrastructure that sort of sits behind it. Having said that, having come from an operator, I mean, I haven't actually heard that tension enormously. I mean, clearly you've always got a certain amount of investment, and you try and, and this is all public information. There was always where are we going to invest the information? And you look at the big operators, and they're trying to balance that out. But my view, I would say, is you kind of need both. What 5G does, though, is it gives you some alternatives, particularly for areas that are quite hard to get to. So actually, they're great together. I think, what we think you'll see is, particularly in rural areas, 5G opens up a whole new alternative. So you can use it to give people access who perhaps can't have fibre because it's just not going to be, or not very unlikely to get it in the near future because it's not commercially viable. It's much easier to get 5G out to them. Whereas in urban areas and semi-urban areas, you're probably going to, continue to have fibre. So, and even in urban, I think you still need both. You need both, would be my view. But 5G opens up an alternative for that super fast access that perhaps is much harder to put in with fixed infrastructure.
Can you see a situation in a few years' time, maybe 5 years' time, where you don't need both, where Wi-Fi will become effectively redundant?
So I think you use them for different things. So if we kind of go through what you'd use broadband for, you use that often for the connection into the building. 5G you tend to use when you're out and about, but you don't have to. And I'll come on to what you can use that for. And there's also a thing called fixed wireless access, which is where you use it kind of instead of your broadband, maybe if you live in a more rural place. But that's something that the operators are sort of working through. Where 5G and Wi-Fi kind of, you start to compare them, particularly in that business environment, and maybe when you're out and about in a coffee shop or something, yes, I think you will typically find that 5G is faster, is more reliable, and particularly in, say, a manufacturing environment. What we're doing quite often with manufacturers now is we're working with them to put in what they call a 5G private network, which is then a really secure network that works off 5G. And then you've got that speed, you've got that really low latency, which someone, and I missed who it was, has just pointed out, that's really important in that manufacturing environment, because you don't want to sort of go stamp a hole in that, hole goes in. You want that to happen at the second you click the button. But it's also more, it's that little bit more, it is more reliable and secure within that as well. So I think you will see 5G in some environments increasingly replace Wi-Fi.
Okay, fantastic. Well, let's turn to Andrew Butler now, the other Andrew, who can tell us a bit about 5G and surgery, remote surgery.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not the expert, but I've been following kind of like 5G's progress for a couple of years now, and it's just, I don't think we kind of are aware of just how big that leap is, as kind of general consumers, from 4G to 5G. And I think Zab has put in the comments about, if it's the smartphone that's the kind of the pin up for 5G, then it would have failed as a technology, because it's its possibilities are seemingly endless at this stage. The point I was making about remote surgery was they did a couple of years ago, through robotics, someone operated on a patient 2,000 miles away, because of the low latency, which is the one of the huge pluses, which will completely transform the medical industry. For emergency surgeries, I imagine having someone available who is a specialist in, say, California, being able to operate on someone in Cleveland, Ohio, for example. It's incredible. The other point, one of the great uses for me personally, and this will come as no surprise to those that know me, but in things like broadcasting and sports broadcasting, the live event. Even if you're at a music gig, you could be sat up in a seat far away from the stage, but if they've got cameras operated through 5G, you could also have a screen in front of you that shows you that perspective as well. So incredibly, and that's also not to say that that'll broadcasting will also probably remove any elements of cables as well, because they wouldn't need to be plugged into different things around stadiums. So yeah, amazing what developments could be in the future.
And I'm going to come to Zav in a second, because he's got his hand up. But Andrew, you've made quite a good case for the benefits of 5G, both in a kind of hypothetical sense, but also in terms of for you as a consumer. But do you have a 5G phone? Would you pay a premium for it?
I don't at the moment. I did upgrade recently, and I'm just still slightly reticent because I can barely get my Bluetooth headphones to work across two devices, at the same time. I'm that kind of consumer, so I know that 4G works. I know its kind of capabilities. I'm yet to see as a consumer kind of what I don't need to stream in 4K for everything, or 8K as it will be in the future. So I don't currently see what I need to have it. Why I need to have 100 times 4G, especially when I have Wi-Fi.
Katherine, is that quite an interesting kind of observation, that potentially when we move up to 5G, quite a lot of consumers every day might not feel that different for your everyday smartphone consumer, but it will transform industries that range from medical to broadcasting to manufacturing in a really fundamental way. But for your average consumer every day looking at Facebook on a smartphone, not so transformative.
I think, we saw this with 3G to 4G. I think people sort of went, I don't really get why. But I think there's two things for me. I think firstly, it is a big difference. So once you're kind of on it, it's the classic from personal experience. You go, this is great. So three things. Secondly, I think the apps will develop. So a bit like as I talked about at the beginning, what 5G enables from a consumer perspective, we're only just starting to think about, and I'd love to talk about healthcare a little bit more in a moment, but there will be so much that hasn't even been thought of, where you go, you only get the full benefit of it on 5G. And I think, I've got my third one. What was I going to say? Something else I was going to say then, but that speed it really does make a difference and catch it up. But if I pick up on the healthcare one, we're already seeing in trials, it doesn't even necessarily have to be surgery, but you can connect ambulances to specialist doctors, so the specialist doctors can give feedback on that patient straight away without so we've seen a few trials on this where they can see the patient effectively in the ambulance and either reduce the need for them to come to hospital or mean they can get that urgent care straight away. So I do think you will notice a difference once you kind of go up to it. But yeah, the business side of it's also huge.
Okay, great. Let's bring in Zav, and then we'll turn the conversation towards the environment, because we want to discuss how 5G can impact in that area as well. But Zav, what do you want to say?
Yeah, hi. I mean, I was somewhat just going to add to what Andrew was saying. I think because of the low latency, which basically hopefully kind of alleviates any delays. Essentially, any time critical actions which have a remote aspect will, in theory, be kind of made possible by 5G. So Andrew's example is the kind of doctor operating on someone in South America from the US. There's also if it's something which consumers want, and maybe this is kind of quite an important aspect, it might be someone conducting an orchestra from Milan and the orchestras in China. It might be the way that a factory floor could make an aeroplane through 3 different factories in different places in the world, with one.
Or indeed, Zav, you could have a sniper operating a sniper rifle from across the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, as happened in the recent assassination of the top Iranian in charge of Iran's nuclear program.
Well, yeah, exactly. And the report of that said that there was a delay. So with 5G, it probably would have been kind of even more effective.
Even more accurate.
Yeah. I mean, another element which is helpful to mention with the low latency as well is virtual reality, because I think lots of people who've tried, quite rudimentary versions of VR will report feeling dizzy, feeling sick, feeling a bit of vertigo when they use it. Often the reason why they feel that way is because there are delays or there are kind of jitters.
Yeah.
If you have a 5G network where that latency is gone, then you might actually see a VR which is actually kind of pleasant to use.
That's great. I've just spilled black ink all over my hands, so that's thrown me a little bit. Let's move on to the environment, because Ericsson is a member of our Accelerating Net Zero coalition. Katherine, you have quite stringent targets to reach. I think you want to get to net zero by 2040. Can you just explain the case for 5G helping not only with Ericsson's own transition, but in general, if we want to talk about sustainability, why 5G has to be part of that conversation?
Yeah, and complicated area this, I think, as I was working this through beforehand. I mean, there's two elements. There's what is Ericsson doing, and kind of what can we do from this perspective. But as you say, the bigger and kind of almost as interesting, more interesting piece is, well, what can Ericsson and 5G and mobile infrastructure do to kind of reduce those emissions globally? I mean, if you take the first, we're aiming for net zero by 2040, aiming to halve our emissions across our supply chain by 2030, and really trying to reduce that impact on the environment and get as much of that, get towards that net zero as soon as we can. We introduce, then there's what can we do for the environment, and there's two sides to that. I guess the first is that whenever a new technology is introduced, more people use it, which means you use more energy. So you're always trying to break that energy curve of this is great, but because loads more people use it, you end up using more energy. So things like, we had a new radio that we brought out a couple of weeks ago with Vodafone that reduced the amount of energy by 43%. So we're always looking for ways to reduce the energy that the radios use. But the really exciting bit is how can we then use that mobile connectivity to reduce emissions. And again, if you go back to those business contexts, that's when it gets super exciting. So there's another example we used with Hyperbat, who make electric car batteries, where they use it again in a virtual reality world to work together on their engineering and on their designs, rather than the teams having to travel to be in the same place or sending lots of different emails and it taking weeks and weeks and weeks. So you can basically be in the same room, and back to the low latency point, which was very eloquently put earlier, that then becomes something quite easy, where you can work together without actually having to travel, and you think of the impact that has, which is just enormous. And then there's all other, loads of ways that mobile connectivity, you reduce travel, you reduce commuting, you enable people to work from wherever they are, and a huge impact that it can have.
So I can see that there's a very strong case for 5G having a big impact on sustainability across a number of different sectors, both kind of this year, but also kind of accelerating into the future. I can see that. But has anyone actually done a study or any research into the environmental impact of actually creating the infrastructure that allows the 5G network to operate? So you got, thousands more masts being built. You're creating a network which will enable, kind of by definition, thousands, millions more devices to log on at the same time. People need to buy mobile phones that are 5G enabled, potentially giving up perfectly good working phones. There's obviously like a big potential environmental impact from simply creating the 5G infrastructure. And I wondered whether anyone has actually measured what that is.
Good question. I mean, not to my knowledge. I guess the question is, though, would they not, things are always developing and you don't get the benefits without some of those challenges. And what I think our job to do to turn it around the other way is to make sure that the benefit you get from it way outweighs the impact that you have on the way through. So you think as they are getting used more and more, we're looking for them to be sort of up to, currently 6.5 times more energy efficient than 4G, and we're looking to get that to 10 times more energy efficient. when you go onto 5G. So although you're using more of it, it becomes more energy efficient. And I think the trick here is going to be to make the progress and the energy efficiency go faster than the kind of increase in usage, because, or certainly keeping pace with it, because the benefits we get from that will bring so many more benefits that it's worth doing. And remember, this infrastructure doesn't last forever, so a bit like your car, you've still got to upgrade it.
Yeah.
Most people won't run their car for 30 years.
I just want to bring in, if I can, my colleague Liz Mosley, who has talked not only about the energy point, but who has mentioned a very interesting point in the chat about inclusion and about the relationship between reliable Wi-Fi, reliable connections, and inclusion. Liz, do you mind making that point?
Oh yeah, sure. Hello, Catherine. It's nice to see you. Yeah, I was just sort of musing really. Obviously, when lockdown happened and we were a live events business, we used to have people coming into the newsroom and it's all friendly and warm wine and chats and everything. And then we thought, oh God, we haven't got a business anymore. And then we did the pivot to digital, and here we are on Zoom. But it very quickly, because of our model, which has a sort of 1-for-1, we have members who join and pay their money, and then we have members who join that are sort of funded through partners and charities and stuff like that. It became very clear very quickly that some people still weren't as able to participate because their connection was rubbish and they couldn't afford the sort of digital divide. And I guess as part of the sort of overall responsible business agenda, we've obviously, the climate and the emissions part of that we've just been talking about is a huge part of it. But there's a sort of social inclusion aspect to that, which is sort of the other side of the sort of weighing scales. And I just would be interested to know, because I don't know, what the sort of broad telecommunications industry, and then Ericsson within that, where does that sit in the strategy, the sort of making sure that everybody is able to participate in the glorious utopian 5G future?
Yeah, and one of the joys of joining Ericsson is this incredibly global organisation, which I've loved being a part of, because you're absolutely right. I mean, some of the stats are shocking, aren't they? So for example, after 18 months, sort of 1.5 million homes in the UK still don't have reliable internet access, which you think of all those homes with children and people trying to, whether they're working from home or they're trying to do shopping or whatever, you've still got 1.5 million homes unable to access the internet, and probably lots more who are only just able to do it and only have one device or whatever. And then if you go globally, that's the global point. I mean, 1 in 3 school children globally don't have access to the internet, which is kind of also quite a shocking number. So you're right. I think it is a huge problem. What do we do about it? I think from an Ericsson specific perspective, we partner with UNICEF, so we're looking to bring connectivity to just under 1 million children globally. We are looking to help build that connectivity up. We do lots of work with the community, but I think one of the big things that 5G does bring is it does allow access in those harder to reach places, but it doesn't, no single company is going to solve the problem, are they? And I think you do see, again, having come from that operator background, you see this is one of the positives probably coming out of the pandemic, is you've seen people realise, A, how important connectivity is, and B, lots of really good initiatives to try and get people and homes online, but not, we're not there yet. Still more work to do.
Thank you. Just on the how environmentally sustainable is 5G. I know that my colleague Mark has posted some figures showing that, or suggesting that 269 megatons of CO2 can be avoided by 2035 by adopting 5G. But then again, those figures did come from O2. So take that maybe with a pinch of salt. Let's bring in Ellen Halliday, who is a reporter and a researcher at Tortoise and works very hard producing really kind of excellent data on all sorts of things, including carbon emissions. Ellen, what point were you making in the chat?
So, I mean, I guess it's kind of like a general point. It's not just about, 5G and the infrastructure that we're talking about, but generally, with the time pressure that we're under to reduce emissions. All of this tech, anything we do, any infrastructure we build as well, whether it's hospitals and things that we really need, there's a level of embedded carbon there. And it just kind of struck me that if we don't know the numbers involved and the sums there, if we're saying 5G will save us a lot of energy, but we can't say, actually, like you said, Alexi, the carbon involved in putting up those masts and everything, that's quite frightening, because the figures here are going to be tight, right? This is a big challenge that we have to hit this target by the middle of the century. So it's not just in this sector, but in everything. It frightens me that people making the decisions about the paths we go down, the infrastructure we build, the tech we pursue, that we don't actually know if it is going to be in the green or the red, which is a question of, I think there's something tricky there in how you even find those numbers. I don't even know how you do that. It's obviously very complicated, but it just worries me.
Catherine, how do you respond to that?
I mean, someone may well have worked out the putting them in the ground. I guess we focus more on the impact that it would have. I mean, I think I would look forward and say, if you don't, can you imagine a world where the UK, for example, is the only one that doesn't have 5G? I mean, we did a study that suggested we can get 15 billion of extra economic growth in the UK through 5G, and also that the impact that it'll have on not travelling, on the way that we work, enabling people to have a better life balance and see their families and communicate globally. I personally completely convinced that way offsets it, and also you can't afford to be the country that gets left behind. I would argue the reverse, which is you need to go faster, because we see other countries globally really stepping ahead on this, and the impact that it can make from both an efficiency and a growth perspective, but also from a sustainability perspective, are just massive.
Let's talk about the geopolitical side of things, because it'd be really interesting to get your views on where the UK is in relation to other European countries, but also to the US and China. But just specifically on China, Huawei was obviously banned from providing 5G equipment to UK networks. It's got to get, or mobile operators have to get out all 5G equipment made by Huawei by 2027. Ericsson is in a kind of weird position in respect to that, isn't it? Because on the one hand, restrictions on a competitor are potentially a good thing, but I think that the overall CEO of Ericsson has argued that actually that's outweighed by the impact on global competition. So, did Ericsson, maybe not you personally, because you might not be able to speak to this, but did Ericsson believe it was right for Huawei to be banned?
Well, firstly, I've only been with Ericsson 6 months, so this was definitely well before my time. So, and in fact, I tend not to try and comment too much on this, just because actually it's kind of happened a number of years ago now, and it is a political decision, and each country, globally is kind of working through what is the right answer for them to do. I mean, if I turn it around the other way, though, what you actually do see, there is much more competition in most of these areas than perhaps first think, or certainly most of them. And secondly, I think the thing that we always say is, and I think probably the interview that you're referring to, is that overall competition is a good thing, and we support that. And actually, you get innovation from challenge and other people coming up with ideas and trying to, how can we be more energy efficient? How can we be better? How can we? So overall, competition and innovation is a good thing. The political decision about which vendors and which country, to be honest, I'm going to leave to the politicians, because that's what they do.
That's fair enough. I mean, on the Huawei decision, it was obviously based around the fear that Huawei would somehow transmit information back to state authorities in China, and it made me wonder about the question of the security of 5G networks themselves. So, are they hackable? Are Ericsson's 5G networks hackable?
Oh gosh, that's a massive question, isn't it? So I guess to take the first one, that you again, it's a political decision on that security. So I'm gonna steer clear of that question. In terms of security, I mean, this is like many technology pieces. This is one of those things that we put an enormous amount of focus into, and we've got a global security team who are constantly upgrading it. 5G is more secure and will continue to get to be more secure. It will. And we spend ages and ages with operators, with government, to improve that and make it as good as it can be. So yes, way more secure. The other thing that you can do with it is you can then create those private networks, which we talked about before. So for organisations where they need a super secure kind of private network, they can create that little world as well. So it is definitely a more secure world. I'm not a security expert though either. I have a big team that do that for us.
Let's talk about how 5G can enable other industries, because it's really interesting to me structurally that telecom sits, as I understand it, within DCMS, but telecoms rollouts and 5G and that kind of infrastructure related technology can have huge impacts on, I don't know, like the ability of farmers to monitor crops properly, or it could have impacts in on the NHS. So is there, are we talking about a structural issue here, a structural problem where telecoms is like shoehorned into a relatively small department, and therefore we're losing the opportunity to fully realize its benefits across the government sector?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, isn't it? And you get this with a number of things. I guess, in an ideal world, what I'd love is that telecoms was at the heart of everything, because it's what I care passionately about and kind of what I live and breathe. However, I guess if you can't have that, the reality is it does cut across everything. So if you can kind of turn around and go, well, it should be at the heart of everything we do. So I would say almost the reverse, which is, what I would love to see is everybody thinks, how can I improve this using technology? Or, how can I do this without having to travel? Or how can I do this in a more efficient way? And you have everybody doing that, because as you say, you can use it in agriculture, for crop monitoring and driving, remote vehicles without having to visit places. Massive usage in like mining and offshore oil rigs. So again, you're not having to go and visit, and you can control stuff. Manufacturing, I mean, basically education, healthcare, everything that we do, it has the power to transform. And I think you've got to enable that conversation and enable that innovation. It's a little bit back to the competition argument. We will never know. No one person knows all the answer. What you've got to do is create that environment where we are all challenging each other to say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? What about, and a little startup that's completely transforming whatever, crop rotation.
And have you or Ericsson more widely had a think about how government could work better in this respect?
Well, they've got quite a tough job, so I'm not going to get drawn into too much politics. We spend a fair amount of time with government on, how can we get that innovation and get the rollout faster. I guess what we're really concerned about is if you get the infrastructure out and you get the ability to run those networks out and about, and the operators, create that world that you can use it. What we then can do is build whatever the next Uber is that works across it, and hopefully there'll be hundreds of those which work across 5G. But yeah, I think that innovation will come from thousands of different places, not from one place.
Okay, I want to bring in a couple of people who are making good points in the chat. Ian Campbell and then Miranda Sharp. But first, I want to ask you about quite an interesting article written by Nick Files in the FT, and he was actually one of the telecoms reporters that I was a little bit scared of at the time, because he knew everything about telecoms, and I think that he still does, because he's still writing about it. And he says there's a distinction or a gap between what telecoms companies can predict. They're very good predictions, but they're less good, he says, at taking advantage of those predictions. And he says, a new generation of telecoms executives are once again talking up a big growth game in digital innovation based on 5G and full fiber. They paint a picture of networks at the heart of an even more connected world. Yet, R&D spend sits between 1% and 2% of revenue at most large telecom companies, according to MTN Consulting. So is there, again, this disconnect between what is promised, what is predicted, and the resources that actually are in place to take advantage of it?
I think this comes back to your first point, actually, which is we sometimes underestimate how much 4G changed our life. And, you step back. Can you imagine a world of this pandemic before we had, super fast home broadband and we had 4G? Like, no, it would have been virtually impossible to work from home on the scale that we have. And I think, 5G, as people come out of their homes and they're looking for that connectivity out and about, which was the third point I was going to say earlier, I forgot. As we come out of our homes and we're trying to get that level of connectivity out and about, then we'll really, really recognise that 5G. So I guess we can sometimes forget how much we've come on since we even got 4G. And I guess my other question would be, is that the right lens to look through it from the telco operators? Actually, Uber didn't come from telco, Amazon didn't come from a telco, your Ocado app didn't come from a telco, Zoom didn't come from a telco. Unfortunately, all the innovation doesn't come from a telco. That's not where you will get the bulk of the R&D of how we use 5G. But it certainly plays a part in it.
There's an interesting discussion in the chat at the moment about whether 5G and faster connections will create a better or a worse or just a different work-life balance. But I think it certainly sounds as if it's going to change it. And on that point, I just want to bring in Ian Campbell to give his views on that if he's around.
Hello.
Hey.
Well, I was just making the point that in my experience, the work-life balance is much less as a result of technology. My job now, you've got to have a smartphone. It's getting more advanced smartphones. So you've got to log into your shift through a smartphone. And you've got to be in Teams at this Microsoft Teams to have team meetings, and you've got to have messaging apps to find out what's going on within your workplace. You can be messaged at any time of day or night unless you turn it off, I suppose. So I think the more that this technology, and I'm really enthusiastic about 5G. I think there's a lot of good things about it, but I just think that it's not going to reduce the work-life balance. It's going to make more workplace stuff impact on people's home life. I think that's an issue that the technology companies have to address.
Is that something you're thinking about, Katherine?
Oh, yes, all the time. So I think about it both how we operate at Ericsson. So we spend lots of time, trying to manage that. But I guess my challenge back would be, it is a shift in the way that we work. And I think, and I would say it enables way more than the downside. But yes, it does require us to adjust the way we work. And I think also to be considerate of other people and kind. So, I mean, things that we've done at Ericsson, for example, is we try really hard not to send emails out of office hours and use delay send a lot more. Think really carefully before you send a message out of hours. That doesn't mean we don't, because sometimes, a customer will need something or something will happen. But actually, what is better work-life balance? And, I'm a mum with an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old, 2 girls. So diversity and work-life balance is a big thing for me. But what makes one person's work-life balance better, because they can pick their kids up from school, have dinner with them and jump back on for an hour in the evening, is a nightmare for someone else. And I think a lot of this is about understanding how different people work and empathy and getting into that new way of working and shifting around. I mean, another example is there's lots of people who have moved out of the city and moved to the country, and we've all heard the tales of the cities are dead and everyone's going to move to the country. Well, again, it means that if you are commuting, that commute is way more effective, or you're not having to commute as often. So that's surely better work-life balance. But I think it's all about how we use it, and we've got to force ourselves to have the conversation and create a world that works for each other.
I'm going to bring in Miranda Sharp, please, who's making a point about the digital markets unit. Miranda, could you make that point and also describe what the digital markets unit is?
I'm only making the point because I'm trying to read the consultation today. So the government has 3 consultations live about data and its role in governing the country and allowing flourishing of humans. And there are a real patchwork of regulators interested in how we use data and how connectivity is delivered to people. And so we're just seeing a new digital market unit with the aim of promoting competition in the tech and innovation sector. And I wondered, Katherine, as representative of the telcos, how you were looking at it and thinking about it.
Gosh, I think you've probably slightly further ahead on the reading than I am on this one, so I might have to go and swat up and come back. I mean, yeah, look, there's a whole load that the government is doing to try and, to give credit where it's due, to try and speed up that 5G rollout and to improve that competition and innovation and so on. I haven't read it in a huge amount of detail. Oh no. However, I mean, my initial response would be, as a general rule, things that improve competition and get people to work together better, that's a good starting point. So I will go away and swat up and maybe we'll have another conversation.
That's a promise, Miranda. I want to bring in Tess Murray in a second to ask a question about Starlink. But let me just talk to you about the UK rollout and the obstacles that are in place, and specifically around planning. What is going on with planning? What needs to happen with planning? Particularly in London, I think there's a problem with planning applications getting rejected. What's happening there?
Yeah, and one stat I saw from one operator at another event was that basically all of their planning applications kind of get rejected at the first pass. Planning is probably one of the things that really slows it down and takes the time. But I get why it has to be there, by the way. So I'm also not saying you should be able to kind of put a mast in anywhere and do whatever, but that process of putting in infrastructure can take a really long time. And it isn't just the planning process, it's also getting access to site, it's how the landlords, liaising with the landlords, and particularly in a world of COVID, where actually, you've got to line up all of that. So you've got to line up getting access to a site that might be closed because there's been no one in the office, together with maybe a road closure because you've got to get a crane in, together with the right planning, together, all of that is incredibly time consuming. And it sounds quite minor, it probably sounds quite minor, but all of this just takes time and it slows down the rollout, whereas in other countries we see that as much slicker, particularly if you go towards Asia. I noticed someone mentioned South Korea, who, sort of are much fleet of foot of that type of thing. Yeah,
I think Mark mentioned South Korea, and it would be interesting to know what does a 5G rollout look like there? What can South Koreans do that we can't?
Yeah, and obviously I'm UK and Ireland, not South Korea, but it is often held up as one of the places where they're very quick at rolling it out. They've got a really clear kind of infrastructure, and they tend to go for that latest technology, and then they tend to get very high adoption very quickly with high innovation off the back of it in terms of the apps that they use. So overall, you tend to see the curve in South Korea as much quicker, and across a lot of those Asian countries. But I do think one of the keys is the faster you get the infrastructure out, a little bit like the conversations we had at the beginning, where it's like, well, actually, is there really value in getting a 5G phone? Because I'm not sure I'm going to get it everywhere. Or as soon as you've got that infrastructure out and you get to the point where you've got, and I would argue we are there in the UK, by the way.
Aren't or are?
We we are at a point where it's definitely worth getting a 5G phone if you're into your technology and your speed, and you live in you live in one of those areas that have 5G. But equally, the faster we go, the more people you take that to, the more benefit you see, the more innovation that you get, and so on. So it becomes that circle of faster rollout and more innovation.
How does, like on a practical level, like how far away does one mast have to be from another mast?
It depends on the type of mast and the type of 5G and the wavelength. But typically, it really varies. But you'll typically have them within whatever, half a mile or a mile. But in rural areas, it could be much further apart. It all depends on the density of that population, what that environment's like, what type of radio that you've got there. Really varies.
But for an urban area, built-up urban area like London, which stretches over a number of miles, you're talking like what, hundreds of masts?
Yes. Yeah, you are.
Okay. Tessa Murray, can you come on camera and ask a question?
Alexi Mostrous. Felt like I was back at school. Yes.
What were you going to say about Starlink? What is Starlink?
Starlink's the fairy lights that Elon Musk is stringing up in space, which is going to bugger our view of the stars. I think there are about 1,000 of them at the moment, but that's due to go up to 5 figures apparently. And so it's just masses and masses of satellites going around with a view to just sort of bypassing any, I may be treading on some very thin technological ice here, but I'm going to go for it anyway, on the basis that you just beam 5G down from space. And it's interesting kind of spending time in rural areas, how many people have already signed up for the beta launch of Starlink, and I think it's going beta in October. And sometimes listening to all of this, and with all due respect, Catherine, I just wonder if actually we're just going to leapfrog this entire sort of earthbound system to a satellite-based system. And in fact, we're sort of tinkering with old technology, and there's going to be a leapfrogging of technology which overtakes all of this.
Catherine, what do you reckon?
Well, I haven't got the comparison of Starlink to 5G. I'm sure someone's done it, so I need to I need to look it out. You're coming at me with the interesting questions. I think the answer will be, you'll see that 5G coverage kind of across the UK. The depth and the quality of it is quite different to what you would get from a satellite. That said, it's an interesting debate and one that, back to my point about, it's always interesting to see the innovation because it makes others innovate more, doesn't it? But I think I'm going to be back in 5G.
Yeah, let's spend the last 5 minutes talking about how you joined Ericsson, because it happened in February and it happened in the middle of a global pandemic. And I think a lot of people would be really interested in how you become CEO of a pretty important company when you can't actually see anyone, when you can't actually meet anyone face to face.
And in the middle of homeschooling, can I just point out as well?
Yeah.
That was adorable. So yeah, I had my 8 and 11-year-old at home. I joined Ericsson 1st of February. Wasn't quite the normal onboarding process to a new company in that sense, that literally, I finished at BT about a week beforehand, shut one laptop and opened a different laptop. So positives, just actually, I guess if I'd have joined in the first lockdown, it might have been slightly different. But by the time you get to the third one, everyone is so used to being online. We use Teams, BT use Teams. Everything is kind of smooth. It's always less of a culture shock joining a new company than it would have been face to face, because I didn't go to the office or anything like that. There were some real positives as well that I hadn't expected. So all the technology worked. I had a laptop delivered to home, and I opened it and it worked, and away I went. And there was just a different set of faces on the screen on day one, which is kind of slightly bizarre if someone had told me that 3 years ago. But some bits of it were really, really good. So one of them, Ericsson, global company, 100,000 people globally, something like 170 something nationalities across the world. You get to meet the people that you need to meet. You don't meet the people who happen to be sitting next to you. So that was a really useful thing. It doesn't matter where they're based. You build relationships, and you build the same relationships wherever they are across the globe, based on kind of your role and how you work with them. Whereas I think if you go back 3 years, I'd have probably done a a global trip, met everyone for half an hour, and then talked to all the people around the corner and wondered why that wasn't the right relationship. So I built the right relationships and had the opportunity to build them in the right level of depth. And everyone just gets it. I mean, that's the amazing thing. After 18 months of it, we're all so used to working from home. Time will tell how deep, what I've missed out on in terms of going to the pub with my team, which I still haven't obviously done. So
yeah, that's a big deal. Not going to the.
It is. I literally, there are people from my team that I've not met yet, and people that I work with. I met my boss once. Didn't even meet him during the interview process. So it's quite interesting.
And what do you think? Looking 5 years ahead, do you think you'll be coming into the office again?
Yeah, I mean, we've always had quite a hybrid working approach. We are quite cautious, to be honest. So we are still not back in the office much, and we probably will. Well, we will probably almost certainly see the year out predominantly working from home. That's our plan. But we've got 20 to 60 people in the office day in, day out, and we've just opened some extra capacity. So if you want to come in, can't work from home, you can come in. What do I think it'll pan out like? I think face-to-face is really important, but when you need to. So I'd like to think what I'm aiming for is you'll meet face-to-face when you need to meet, and you won't when you don't need to meet. I think the bigger challenge is how do you make it work when you've got half in the office and half at home? And I think those are the scenarios that we probably need to plan for and try and avoid, if I'm honest. You're either together and you're having a sort of team day and you're all face to face, or you're at home. Or we'll have some new funky tool and innovation that we haven't thought of yet.
Well, hybrid working and how to do it is definitely a whole thinking in itself. Just before we go, what is the craziest 5G conspiracy theory that you've come across that has actually gained some traction?
The good thing for me is I joined after a lot of this conspiracy theory, but I mean, yeah, it's all wrong, basically, isn't it? And the worst thing, the thing that really annoys me is the 5G conspiracy theory where it's sort of linked to COVID, and it's our engineers. We've got 400 engineers who are out and about every day fixing these masts, who are keeping people connected, helping children access schools. So I'm going to go off on a passionate rant here. They're then getting attacked when they're keeping the country connected, and that's obviously unacceptable. But we have seen it improve. I mean, since I've joined, there was a peak, I think, about a year ago, and it has calmed down a little bit now.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you so much. It's been such an interesting conversation. I think, there's loads of points to take away. I just noted down 4. One, there's loads of evidence that suggests that 5G is going to be transformative. There's some evidence that suggests that hasn't happened yet, but I mean, all the evidence seems to weigh in favor of a transformative technology. But there doesn't seem to be too much objective data around how that transformation will happen, including the carbon cost of it happening, to Ellen's point in the chat. So there may be a difference, it seems, between promise and reality, at least at the moment, the difference between mobile surgeries on the one hand and attaching your Bluetooth headphones on the other. And the 4th point I just noted down is that the government probably needs to rethink how it sees technology, because sticking telecoms in DCMS seems to underplay its universal or its potential universal application. But there's a lot to think about, and I'm just very grateful to Katherine for coming and having this conversation and taking the time out of her day to come and chat to us about a difficult but really, really, really crucial and important topic. So thank you very much, Katherine.
No, thank you, and thank you to everyone for your questions. Good questions.
Thank you very much, everyone who joined in. Ian, Andrew, the 2 Andrews, Zav, Tess, everyone who joined in. Thank you very much, and have a great day.